Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast where you'll hear from extraordinary women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder of Fearless Women, a company with a powerful ambition to drive positive change for women's sport. I am so grateful to Barclays for once again choosing to sponsor this series of The Game Changers, which will focus on fearless women in football. In each of the 8 episodes, I'm talking to a trailblazing woman, reinforcing Barclays' huge commitment to the beautiful game. Last year, Barclays announced the biggest ever sponsorship of women's sport in the UK as the Barclays FA WSL became Europe's first fully professional women's football league. Their support will help the future growth of the league and its clubs. A huge amount of their investment also went into establishing the Girls Football School partnerships with the aim of ensuring that all girls in England will have equal access to play football in schools by 2024. My guest today is Dr. Rimla Akhtar, former chair of the Muslim Women's Sports Foundation and the first Muslim woman to sit on the FA Council. Ranked by Forbes and The Independent as one of the most powerful women in international sports, in 2015 Rimla was awarded an MBE for her contribution to equality and diversity in sport. I asked Rimla about her home life as a child.
So I grew up in North London, in Edgware, and I was born in a home on a street where we were the first non-white family to move in, and I think I saw the impact of that from a very young age. You know, not knowing really what people were saying or what they wanted to get across to me, but certainly this sense of not belonging and not feeling welcome in the environment that we were in. I grew up with the sort of instability in that sense, although stability was provided by my family, and 2 members of my family in particular were my brothers, my older brothers. You know, being the only girl, the youngest of 3, it was just a case of I would either join them or be left out, and my mother encouraged me to join them. And that meant, you know, playing football, playing cricket or whatever other sports it was that they were playing, I'd just join with them. And like I say, my mother, as a keen sportswoman herself, encouraged that. That's really how I got into sport, and I just loved it ever since.
You see, Mum was keen on sport. What was her background?
So she, back in Pakistan, where she's from, the city that she was in, her family's got a very much an army and navy sort of background, army and RAF background in Pakistan. So sort of the sense of being healthy and fit was always there. Her mother was a basketball player, not at a national level, but she played basketball. Her father was a hockey referee as well as a player. It's been in the blood, I think, for generations. And she was sports president year after year at her school. You know, I remember going to Pakistan once, actually, during the summer holidays, as South Asians tend to, growing up, and, there for about 4 weeks, and going into a particular room in my nan's house, and all this stuff that was locked up in the suitcases. And I opened one of them up, and I found all these trophies. And I asked my nan whose these were, and she said, they're your mother's. So I actually brought them back to London with us on that trip because I wanted to shine them and sort of find a space to put them in. But yeah, so she's been really into her sport from a very young age.
And was she therefore encouraging of you, and as much so as she was of your brothers playing sport?
I think, to be honest, she probably encouraged me more than my brothers in every sense, not just in the sporting sense, to be better, to be the best that I can be. She was sort of like, the boys will do what they want to do, but I want to focus on you and you getting as far as your potential can help you reach. And I'm going to support that and push you as much as possible. So she's always been a driver along every aspect of my life. And my brothers, you know, have been extremely supportive of everything. I mean, they're older brothers, so they'll take the mick out of me when they want to, right? That's what older brothers do.
Absolutely. And did you ever feel any frustration in terms of the opportunities they had to play? Because they went on to play football at Barnet, I believe, were they?
Yeah, they were scouted actually for Barnet. This was all when Barnet were actually in I think it was the 2nd division, the old 2nd division at the time, I think it was. So they were scouted for the academy. But yeah, I guess I didn't really think about it back then because I was at school and I was really enjoying, you know, playing in my school teams. And so for me, I was having fun. I was also quite studious. So I was finding that balance between studies and playing sports. And for me, someone like me, you know, I didn't really have any role models to say that someone like me could make a career in the sports field. It was only something that my brothers could potentially consider, even though, to be honest, there weren't and there aren't enough Asian role models in football. But they were scouted. My mum supported them as much as she could. But I guess those opportunities, I didn't really think about them at the time, but looking back at it, of course, I would love to. I played county cricket, I played East of England lacrosse, could have gotten further, I believe, if the opportunities were easier to access and if there were more people that I could look to and say, yeah, I can do what she's doing. And I guess that's what I'm trying to create now is that diversity of female role models that any girl growing up can look up to and say, I can do what she's doing.
And do you think things are different for young Pakistani girls in Britain today?
I think, yes. One of the things that I always say is that a lot of this depends, in my opinion, on the mother. And I feel that in my own life. And actually, when I was at the chair of the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, the women and girls that we worked with, more often than not, we'd find that those that understood and appreciated sport and had a confidence when it came to sport, their mothers were into sport themselves. They understood the benefits of sport for their children, whether they're boys or girls. And so actually, what we're seeing is a shift in attitude amongst mothers of my generation and those coming after us towards sport and being fit and active and healthy. And there are many individuals and organisations across the country that are helping to shift that attitude. And I think that is then creating a space of it's great to be active and it's important that you're active. This Ramadan in 2020, our fasting month, my brother and I actually did like an online campaign to get people from the Muslim community active during Ramadan whilst they're fasting, which is a tall order if you think about it. On top of that, it's lockdown. On top of that, it's really hot. But it was successful because people understand the importance of keeping fit and active. And even if they haven't done before, they had a community in which they could do it. And I think that's what's really shifted the dial. It's the fact that the sports industry has learned through individuals like myself and others across the country who are helping them understand, how do you work with these communities? How do you engage with them in a way that works for them? So that's helped. But I think the barriers still lie in terms of the pathways to the elite level. There are many individuals, we're seeing them come across sports media now. We're seeing more and more Muslims and Asian girls across sports media. We're starting to see a few more in the coaching space, but not so many able to make it up that pathway to the highest levels of actually being a performance athlete. And that's something I think is partly due to that attitude of sport not being a career because we don't have the role models there, the chicken and egg sort of situation. So can I really make a career of this? But mainly, I think because the pathways aren't inclusive enough. So the way that sports actually access their talent and where they choose what pool of talent they go to, I think that's a massive issue that still needs to be dealt with. And therefore, for me, the elite performance pathway is still a massive issue.
Absolutely. And I think I've felt that in the past when I've seen pictures of the women World Cup champions, whether it's cricket or hockey or rugby, and it just from a visual perspective, it just seems to be very much the same kind of women, same backgrounds coming through in those sports. Do you feel that's changing? Do you feel it's changed from when you were growing up?
I certainly think that there are pockets of good efforts and individuals who in their own right have just been awesome in getting themselves seen and heard and then included. So I think of the likes of Dana Abdul Karim, who was the first hijab wearing Muslim athlete to represent England. She played rounders for England and was fantastic to the extent that she then became under 18s coach, I think it was, and sort of rewrote their entire coaching curriculum, I believe, as well as pockets of individuals, like I say, across the coaching pathway, etc. But we're not seeing a significant number, I think, that will really show that things are changing. I've gone across all sorts of talent centres for different sports across the UK, and I'm still seeing the same people. A lot of the sports, when it comes to the female pathway side of things, are very white middle class, and that has to change. And that has to change in terms of where you're going to, like I say, to access the talent and how easy you're making it for those girls to actually come to sessions. So I remember I played for Hearts cricket when I was at school because my school was in Hertfordshire. The issue for me was I live in North London and I had to go all the way to the northern edge of Hertfordshire, which was just too much for me and my mother to consistently be doing on top of everything else. So how accessible are your pathways in that sense even? All of these kind of things still need to be looked at, I think, to a much greater degree, and that requires investment, more investment into the women's sports space. I think, the old sort of stereotypes around are women from Asian, Black, Muslim, whatever identity group you want to look at, are those women able to be athletes? I think that question has been easily batted out. I think people have really got to get over that, because it's just not true. And we can look internationally for that. If you look at the Indian women's cricket team, for example, there you go, in terms of how amazing they are. The Pakistani team is not, far behind. We see all these Arab athletes that are there, African athletes that are there, and, just starting to get involved in sports that are new sports as well, whether it's black girls surfing or whether it's, Arab girls in parkour or whatever it is. It's very clear to see the talent is out there. It's just how do these, and certainly in the UK, how do we access that talent, and how wide are we really going, and how deep and far are we going in terms of accessing talent?
Fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. If I can, I'm going to take you back to your time. Obviously, you did very well at school, you did well at university, and you ended up working at PwC in the city. How was that at the time as an experience for a woman, and a woman of colour at the time?
It was a mixed experience, in the sense that I loved working at PwC. I never felt that I was I shouldn't have to say this, but I feel like I was lucky in that I didn't have to experience any discrimination. I didn't feel that my gender or my ethnicity or the fact that I wear a hijab impacted in my ability to be seen and my talent to be seen. And so I was promoted when I expected to be promoted, and my managers would work with me in a way that I expected them to, in the sense of really pushing me to just keep improving and improving and improving. I benefited from that environment, and the clients that I worked with were amazing as well. I would say that the mixed piece is because I remember actually when I was at university, I did a year out at Ernst & Young. And that was sort of my first exposure to life in the city, as it were. And I remember a female partner was asked to come and speak to the female graduates, because I joined with the graduates even though I wasn't a graduate. She was asked to speak to us, and there were about 5 or 6 of us, about what her experience of getting to partner was like. And she was probably in her 50s at this stage, and this is back in 2004, it would have been. One thing that sticks in my mind from what she said was, she said that she had to choose between becoming a partner and having a family. And that broke my heart, first of all, for her, first and foremost. But it didn't set a good tone in terms of what we as women coming into that life in the city were then going to expect. And I guess things have changed massively since then. Even in terms of the time that I was at PwC, I saw things changing in terms of women that were making up the managerial ladder towards partner, and how PwC were looking to shift how they worked. I think they're a lot better now than they were even 15 years ago when I first started there. But there's still so much more to be done to make the assumptions that we make about life and about how we, optimize performance or optimize growth, or whatever growth means. We just need to look and check at those assumptions to really think about what does it really mean. And I think the fact that suddenly lockdown has been imposed on us, all of our assumptions are being challenged about what works, what is good, what are our values, why are we doing what we do. Can we streamline? Can we do things better? All of those things are happening right now. And I think we can use this as an opportunity to work towards a fairer, better way of being, whether it's in the city or whatever industry or life in general.
Absolutely. Here. Were you still playing sport when you were working there in the city?
Yeah, I mean, I was playing different sports at different levels. So obviously I'm sports crazy. So I'm going to play anything and everything that I come across. I'm always, don't knock it until you've tried it kind of thing. I'm extremely competitive. So probably if I'm not good at something, I'll probably stop playing it, knowing me. But I actually delayed my induction to PwC because in 2005, we were going out to Iran to play in the Muslim Women's Games, or the Women's Islamic Games as they were then known. So yeah, sport did impact my life a little bit in that sense, and sort of fitting things around my work schedule. But yeah, other than that, it was just playing for fun and enjoying myself, just enjoying what sport brings.
It should be. And you captained the British Muslim women's futsal team, I think, in 2012. What was that experience like to represent your country?
Oh goodness, it's just amazing. I think the first time we represented Britain was back in 2001, which was the first time Britain had been invited to these games. These games, just for background, are essentially an Olympic-style tournament held in an all-female environment. So it sort of catered to the needs of absolutely every athlete, coach, participant in the tournament, endorsed by the IOC and held over in Iran, in Tehran. It was just an amazing experience to put on, a kit with the British flag, to be standing there with the national anthem going off and just being really proud. And then in 2005, being selected as captain was massive, but just stepping up into that role of being the leader on and off the court, as it were, because it's a futsal court, obviously indoors. I actually got injured in the first match. I went over on my left ankle as I was turning, and I was out for the rest of the tournament.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was pretty awful on a personal note, actually, because I just didn't get to play. And it was really difficult, actually, watching from the sidelines. I now know what coaches go through. It was really difficult to watch from the sidelines and wanting to be there and supporting everyone on the court. But actually, I learned so much about how much you can lead from the sidelines and how important that is. So every experience, I think, is there for a reason, and it's given me, certainly at the time, it gave me a lot to learn and process.
And it's around that time that you became chair of the Muslim Women's Sports Foundation. How did that come about?
Yeah. It was actually when we came back from the games in 2005. So we're around sort of September, October time. Prior to the games, we'd gotten involved, myself and Vice Captain Aisha Abdeen. The two of us had gotten involved with supporting the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, which was the organisation that was putting the team together. We'd got involved with just sort of helping, volunteering in the background. I guess that was really that first exposure to the administration side of sport and what it takes to put a team together and to get the team out there. So we just felt as players we needed to give back as well, because there were so many other volunteers that were doing things for us that we wanted to do some more. So when we came back from the games, we continued that volunteering with them. And actually, given all that experience I'd had of working at EY for a year, then I'd done a year of management at Imperial, and learned so much through that process, that I felt like I could support them. And the best way I could support them was to help put together a strategy for the longer term. Up until that point, when we returned from the games in 2005, it was very much an organisation that was purely focused on this British team. And whilst it was lovely to be united with this group of sisters, having thought I was the only Muslim girl that was into football or into sports, to suddenly come across all these girls that were also into it, it was an amazing feeling, yes. But there was clearly this sense, and Aisha and I shared this sense, that more needed to be done, and we needed to build a foundation on which we could grow this group of Muslim women and girls that are in the sports space, and in whichever way they wanted to be, whether it was as a player, elite pathway, coach, referee, administrator, volunteer, fan, whatever it was, we wanted to support that. So that's where we came up with the strategy. The guys that were in charge at the time said, "This is great. How about you help deliver it?" And so I took over as chair, Aisha's vice chair, and we just sort of ran with it. And thankfully, through the enthusiasm and the dedication of everyone that supported us along the way, we were able to make it a successful initiative for us.
Excellent. And how did your involvement with the Football Association begin?
Obviously, doing the work with the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, and particularly with futsal, we were in contact with Middlesex FA, our local county FA, and a wonderful woman there called Charlie Edwards, who supported our futsal team. It was, I guess, through her recommendation, the FA, when they were back in Soho Square, so quite a long time ago, they were having their first ever sort of gathering of women from ethnic minority communities with Kick It Out. They'd organised this day to bring women from ethnic minorities together who were in the game. And so the FA asked us to present our project as best practice, what we were doing at the foundation. On a personal note, that began my journey in terms of in the governance and leadership space of sport, but also from a foundation perspective, the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation was able to access a large pot of funding thanks to that one presentation, because the people in the audience saw what we were doing and thought, we have to fund you. So it was a really fantastic day for us. So that's really where the journey began. Started to be asked to come in and advise them on in different groups and in different situations. That's where, really fast forward to 2013, the Inclusion Advisory Board that was set up at the FA, and I went through the process and got selected for that, and that's where it's come from, really.
And then you became the first Muslim woman on the FA Council itself. How daunting was that at the time? Did you feel that you were ready to join the council?
I think I didn't think about the impact and the significance of that moment, in the sense that I'm the first Muslim or Asian woman on that council. There was a personal sense this is a little bit daunting because of everything that I'd heard about the council and the people on the council. I'd heard that this was a space for, white men in their 70s and 80s. And you get this sense of what it might look like or feel like based on, I can say from my past experiences as well, growing up. And so in that sense, a little bit daunting, and you kind of fearful whether it's a space that you can enter. But actually, what ended up happening for me was I did doubt initially, because the process is that you get elected by your peers on the inclusion board to the council to represent them on the council. So I had to go through that process, but I had to put myself forward. And really, for me, I doubted whether I was ready to go onto that council, not because of what I thought I would bring, but because I was thinking about whether the council would be ready for me. So would I be included? Would they see me beyond this piece of cloth that I wear around my head? Would they see me beyond my age, actually? All these kind of things. And it was one particular individual at the FA who's a friend, and I asked her and I said, do you think I'm ready? And she said, yeah, why not? There was no doubt in her mind at all, which then gave me the sense of, yeah, I can do this.
Was the makeup of the council as you anticipated, and did they listen to you and respect what you were saying?
100% for question one. When I joined, it was about 100 odd people on the council. I was one of 4 women, and two were from counties. One was Heather Abatz, who's on the board, and myself. And then there were 3 other people of colour. So Heather, myself, Paul Elliott, who joined soon after, actually, so he wasn't even there when I joined, and another individual who was from the women's game. So there's 4, so really small percentages you're talking about there. And, the significant stat is always the one that I say. I was probably less than half the average age of the council at the time. Certainly the youngest member to have ever joined at the time. Thankfully, we've got younger members that have joined since. Yeah, it was exactly what I expected in that sense. In terms of being listened to and heard and accepted, I was definitely accepted into the fold. And actually, I can point to a few individuals who are from that male, white 70s and 80s background, who showed me the ropes, as it were, and helped to integrate me into the systems and the way they currently work. Not that it meant that I would not want to change things, because obviously I would, but certainly this is how things are done, and getting used to that and being heard in that sense, and helping to actually promote and push me behind the scenes, I think, as well. Even though I've not been able to confirm it to this day, I'm pretty sure that 1 or 2 of them in particular were really, being my voice when I wasn't there, speaking in support of me, and actually things that I was suggesting to them to be done, they were picking up on that. So one of the things I can point to as an example is that soon after joining, and then Paul Elliott joined soon after as the second representative from the inclusion board and council, we had this look at the governance structure of the FA and looked at the fact that there's a national game board, and there's a professional game board, and there's a women's football board that sit under the main board, where clearly there's a need to understand inclusion matters. And so we spoke to the then chairs of those boards, and we said, we'd like to have representatives on there. We'd like to get people onto there from outside of the current circle. They took it and they ran with it, and they said, yeah, let's do it, straight away, support for that. And to look at where we were back then in 2014 when we joined the council to where we are now, where if you look at the council right now, the diversity of that council is just in stark contrast to when I first joined, in terms of the number of women, the number of, still needs to be a huge increase in terms of ethnic minorities on there, but there's been an increase, which is great to see. Young people coming on, not just because they've been placed on, like myself or Paul or someone from the youth council, but because they're coming naturally and organically through the processes. That's been great to see. All of this change is just good to see. There's a lot more to be done, but we've been able to see that change, and I would hope that's largely down to the push that myself, Paul, and everyone else that's now on that journey of inclusion and diversity with us is also pushing towards.
Fantastic to hear. And you've obviously sat on a number of different boards and do now. What kind of board member are you, would you say?
I think I take on different personalities, depending on the situation, to be honest. Look, my style is very much authentic, speak the truth, speak my truth, certainly, and just to give my all in every situation. I demand excellence of myself, and I try and get that excellence from others around me. And I guess the best way is to be a personal leadership. I always talk about personal leadership and really leading by example. So someone for whom values is the core of everything, the purpose of why we're doing something, not just trying to grow for the sake of growing, but what are we trying to achieve and at what cost actually might that be? Those are kind of questions I think I bring around a board table. But, it's for me, I guess, for some people, I could be challenging in some moments. That doesn't always help on a human level, but I try and do it with compassion. I'm persistent, that's for sure. If I believe something's right, then, and certainly on the inclusion and diversity piece and getting equality of opportunity, I will, constantly be challenging on that. But hopefully someone who's fair. If people deserve praise, then the praise is always there. And if people deserve a bit of support to get things right, then that support's going to be there as well.
And what would you say to young men and women considering board positions perhaps, but maybe lacking in confidence in their capabilities here and now?
If you can, ideally finding mentors, I think really helps. So I've never had one mentor that I've gone to and said, this person's my mentor. But I've always had people around me like that person who said to me, you go for it. And sometimes you need those individuals to just get you through different moments in your life, whether it's going for a board position or otherwise. And I think there's this idea, isn't this, of having your personal boardroom, which is an idea that's been around for a while. And I would say, think about that. Think about who's going to be your champion, who's going to be your supporter, who's going to be your critique as well, actually, someone who tells you what you could do better, plays devil's advocate when you need them to, all that kind of stuff. Think about all these different roles. Think about who's going to be the door opener for you, the connector, because in the end, it's through those people that you'll get the opportunities that will come to you. And I've definitely seen that in the various boardroom roles that I currently hold, as well as other bits of work that I've done. It's always someone going, Rimla, I think you'd be perfect for this. Do you want to join us, or could you help us with this? So I would say keep doing that. The human connection is really important, and having your personal cheerleaders around you are really important as well.
Excellent. I'm going to take you back, if I can, a little bit. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the hijab ban that was put in place in 2007, because I think it's, as I've listened and read more of your interviews and podcasts, I guess I didn't know as much about it as I thought I did, and I think it's really kind of important to look back at it and see. So what was the story behind that?
The hijab ban in 2007, wow, it was a special moment, I'll say that much, Sue. It was the most rushed through thing I've ever seen in my life in the sports industry. It was essentially a young girl, I believe she was about 15 years old, due to play football with her team in Canada, and she wears the hijab. For some reason, the referee just said to her, you have to remove the hijab. It's for him, he was sort of saying it's a safety concern, blah, blah, blah. She refused, obviously, to remove it, and so she was red carded. So the referee decided to send her off because she refused to remove her hijab. That obviously created this sort of uproar, and it went from being a local Canadian issue to a national and then an international issue. And it just so happened that at the time of this, I think about a week after the incident or so, something like a very short time scale afterwards, there was a meeting of IFAB in Manchester. And IFAB is the body that is a part of FIFA, the International Federation for Football, and they set the laws of the game. I think at that point in time, there was no specific law that prevented the hijab from being worn. And however, they decided, this group of 8 individuals, and you can imagine the demographic of those individuals, decided in their wisdom to say that the hijab was not allowed on the pitch, on the field of play. But it wasn't just the hijab, actually. It was actually any form of religious statement or expression on the field of play. And therefore, hijab was determined as this religious expression. The turban would also be the yarmulke, the Jewish cap the men wear. That was also determined as a religious expression. So all of these would be banned. But clearly, the greatest impact would be on Muslim women, because there are many more Muslim women playing football than there are Sikh men with the turban, etc. Or that's how it came across at the time. Yeah, I still remember the statement coming out of Manchester that it had been banned, and again further uproar around this, and that's where I guess that sort of activism in a real sense began, from a personal perspective, and also internationally starting to become connected with others around the world who were going to help us along the way. Long story short, it took us 7 whole years to overturn that ban. It took us years of campaigning. I remember writing as chair of the foundation to all of the home nations, because IFAB is made up of 4 people from FIFA and then 4 other people who are from each of the home nations. And so therefore, it was very clear that at least one person from the home nations would have voted for this ban. I received a response, obviously, from the English FA, and I think it was a Scottish FA. I forget now. I'm sorry, my memory's awful. But I received responses from 2 out of the 4 who were very supportive of my position, obviously, and particularly through the English FA and Sue Ravenlaw, who was then head of equality at the FA and safeguarding, who supported and pushed as much as she could internally with the English FA to do what we could to try and influence at the FIFA level. The issue was, I think there's all sorts of politics at that level at FIFA in terms of secularism and religious expression in sport. And Prince Ali of Jordan, he got involved because obviously a lot of his players in Jordan at the Jordan FA would have been wearing the hijab. And eventually, because he was obviously in the executive committee, he was able to get a 2-year trial period. So they had to do a 2-year trial to prove that the hijab was not a safety concern. And once we went through that process, the medical committee checked it all, that's when the ban was overturned. However, one thing that's always struck with me, and I've been told not to touch it because there might be problems, problems might resurface, but I still struggle with it. And that is that they had to argue that the hijab was not a religious garment, it was a cultural garment. And that to me is totally against, what anyone outside of Muslim majority countries will say. Because someone like me, it's very much a religious expression. It's an expression of me and how I choose to live my life from a religious aspect. And so there are, things that I'm still not 100% okay with, but in the grander scheme of things, you kind of have to go, look, we can play football and we can take that battle on when we need to take that battle on. And it's about timing. So, it was a huge, huge struggle, but it united people, the likes of Moya Dodd and the pressure that she put from all the way in Australia. Now I can call her a friend, Asma Halal, who's in Australia and Sydney, who also was part of that with Moya and the push from that side. Shireen Ahmed over in America, in Canada, in Toronto, who's a sports writer and was really, pushing it from her perspective in terms of sports journalism. So it really united people around this cause. What it was a shame was 2014 was when it was overturned, and in their wisdom, FIBA, the basketball equivalent of FIFA, decided to ban the hijab in 2014, just after FIFA had overturned their ban. So, yeah, just constant battles. I think it was at this point that I just decided, you know what, we need to do a full-scale review of hijab bans and clothing bans of all sports, and it's something I've been working on, for a while. But yeah, it's just unnecessary laws that are put in by people who don't understand the impact of them, to be honest. And that's why leadership and diversity in leadership and governance is so important as well for things like that.
I'm going to come a little bit onto that, actually. An incredibly important week for equality and all that's happening in the US. And I'm sometimes struck, and I was this week again, by the fact that the sports sector that I work in does feel dominated by white middle class women in many of the networks that I circulate in. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, 100%. I don't think anyone could argue with that, to be honest. And we just need to, and I think you talked about it earlier on in terms of the sports teams. So even if you look at it from a playing perspective, very much dominated by white women, you've got to look at that and go, there's something not right here. We need to stop making excuses for that, as I've sort of talked about earlier on. But we've really got to think about why that is and what needs to change. And I think governance is one aspect of it. The idea that you get diversity in decision-making spaces is really, really important. But we also need, people, if they are from the white community, they also need to educate themselves around what are their own biases, and are they actually looking as wide and deep and as far as they can when it comes to their area and the area that they look after. This isn't about, just having a takeover of people that are not from the white community. This is about everyone working together to ensure that there's sufficient representation, and there's also the decision making is done with everyone in mind. And I think if you look at boardrooms, whether you look at players' dressing rooms or whether you look at coaching, all of these aspects, and in some sports it's the fan base as well, you can clearly see that it's not a safe space for people of color, but particularly women of color, because you have to deal with the gendered racism as well as just the sexism. Or if you're a Muslim girl that wears the hijab and is visibly Muslim, dealing with that aspect of it, and particularly the heightened Islamophobia that we deal with nowadays. Think of it in addition to that as current events actually in America, that think of being a black Muslim woman, a black visibly Muslim woman, and what that means, and all the different levels of your identity that you are so proud of, but those levels of your identity being used almost against you. So yeah, I think in all of my time in the sports industry, it's been a very white women-led movement, and I've called that out in a number of spaces, and you might be aware of some of those. And I have to say, in most cases, the reaction has been oh yeah, you're actually right about this, and what can we do? There are some who kind of see me, as I say, as a challenger, and therefore kind of just go, oh, it's and push it to a side almost. But I'm more interested in where we can create change and working in spaces that are mutually collaborative to change that. And I'm starting to see those changes now. So I remember getting a group of women from ethnic minorities together, I think it was about 5 years ago now. And, these were the issues that were being talked about five years ago, from media rooms, walking into newsrooms and feeling like, or knowing that you are the only person that looks like you, and what that feels like, dealing with microaggressions that are, like I say, gendered racism, just sexist comments or homophobic comments and all these kind of things. Walking into a space and not knowing how to tackle that, how to deal with it, knowing that if you speak out, actually, does that mean your career is going to be at stake here? The repercussions of dealing with that. I mean, I think John Boyega spoke recently at a rally in London, and he said, look, I don't know if I'm going to have a career after this, but bleep that is basically what he said. But he's identifying a really real issue of the repercussions that Black and Asian people face when we speak our truth, whether it's in public or at work. And the fact that we have to think about this is not okay. And like I said earlier on, I know I'm seen as challenging by some, but I've learned to accept that, because to me, it says more about the people on the other side than it does about me. All I'm working towards is equality of opportunity and respect for our communities, which is something I'll never apologize for. So it's about not having to do those things. And I think whether you're white, Black, Asian, whatever, we need to create an environment where the diversity is celebrated and difference is celebrated. And we can only, I believe, do that if we actually go outside of our circles and start to positively and proactively seek other opinions, and seek people from different backgrounds with different experiences and bring that together. I think it only just adds value to who we are as people and whatever organization it is we're working with.
Wonderful. Thank you. Fantastic words. Can you tell me a little bit more about your work at the moment with Sport England and Get On Board? I think that kind of reinforces what you're commenting on there.
Yeah, so we at Ripton Consulting, we took on a project with Sport England, which actually fell out of the meeting that we had with women from ethnic minorities, because we didn't want to just moan about all the issues that we're facing. We wanted to really think about what needs to be done. And a couple of key areas were education for the sports sector in terms of what needs to be done from their side of things, but also mentoring and support and that sort of thing of knowing how to navigate, your career and knowing how to really make your way up and smash through the multiple glass ceilings that you face as a woman of colour. When I presented that to Sports England, we had the Code for Governance that came out a few years ago from Sports England and UK Sport, which recognised that, it said that you needed, 30% gender balance on your boards was the target that they set. But I was disappointed that there wasn't such targets. If you're going to set a target for gender, then as far as I'm concerned, you need to set a target across diversity and the different strands of diversity. And so I was really disappointed, particularly considering that there's such a small number of ethnic minorities on sports boards, even when the code was being put together and even now. And so we spoke, Sports England and I, and we spoke about the fact that this was disappointing, the fact that we needed to do something. And I know that there was this sort of move from within as well to do something about it. Let's address the fact that we need more diversity, full stop, on our boards. And so that's where the programme that Perrott Labour actually won the bid to deliver. They put this campaign together to produce a board-ready list of diverse candidates for boards, because it's one of the things I'm sure, Sue, you've heard as well, when people say that they want more diversity on their boards. If you say to someone, you challenge them that, you should have more diversity on your board, they'll turn around and say, oh, we don't know where these people are, we can't find them, and can you help us, and all that kind of stuff. And we just almost needed to call their bluff and say, look, here's a list of over 100, take your pick. So that's what we decided to do. Perrott Labour, like I say, led that, and a consortium of partners, including Rimla Consulting. We were tasked by Sports England really to focus on women from ethnic minorities, specifically based on all of that stuff around mentoring and support and guidance. It's not to say that there was anything wrong with the women. The women were absolutely fine, but it was about navigating the industry, which can be hard, especially when you're on your own. That's where it came from. We had 12 women on the programme who were from different industries, actually, sports people included in that as well, but from the arts, education sectors. They just did fantastic, and over half are on boards or are ambassadors at boards. Another quarter are currently waiting. They're sort of on hold because of COVID, but hopefully they'll be on boards very soon as well.
Excellent. Oh, that's so positive to hear. And you've recently joined, not that recently, but joined the board of the RFL, and they were one of our clients actually many years ago. What a lovely bunch of lovely people, lovely sport, lovely community. So I've almost asked my own question now. I was going to say, so why did you choose?
I think, you just said it, didn't you? I was 100% honest to them in my interview, and I'll be the same here. That I've heard of Super League. I've seen it on Sky, but I'm not a rugby league person. I'm from the south. I'm from London, and rugby league is definitely not in London. I'd grown up watching Union, which was not the best thing probably to say in an interview with League, but it was the honest truth. But what happened was actually, before applying, the more I spoke to people in the rugby league space, whether here in the UK or abroad, the more I just realised that the values of this sport are so aligned to who I am and what I'm about. And when I talk about values, I talk about respect, I talk about integrity, I talk about community. I think about inclusion. I think about, just being a really real sport, and not just, in a touchy-feely kind of way, but just practically in terms of what they're about purpose-wise, the difference that they make to the lives of the people that they engage with. And even the sport itself is a proper sport. I mean, I'm not going to make comparisons to Union, but it's a proper sport. So, just so many good things. I just thought this is an opportunity I don't want to lose out on. And I'm just really grateful that they selected me to join their board. Look, they'll be the first also to recognise that they're a very inclusive sport, but there are areas that they have to develop in as well. And that's something that I can support them with. And I'm doing currently. So really enjoying the journey thus far. But they are just a great bunch of people who, this means more to them.
Excellent. That's so true. And it's fantastic that the World Cup is so inclusive in terms of women, the men's game, the wheelchair games all taking place too. It's great to see that as a sport as well.
Yeah. Which other sport can boast that?
Absolutely.
It just goes to show what they're about.
I'm going to finally come to a couple of questions, if I can do. Looking back across your career, for others that are, I guess, aspiring to be where you are in the future, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your career?
I would say, and I think this is partly because of the type of my character, I guess. I tend to look inward a lot, and I'm my biggest critic. So I really don't need other people to criticize me, but I do get that sometimes as well, which is fine. But I am my biggest critic. And I think that oftentimes that can translate to not always going for positions, not pushing myself as far as I would like to, as I would hope to, more than anything else. And so I think in terms of challenges, they've always been on a personal level. So my attitude is very much that the structures and systemic discrimination, structures of inequalities exist. I know that they exist, but I want to focus on what I can do. So it's that thing of personal leadership. What can I do to navigate around them? It's something I shouldn't have to do, but I will do it in order to then, I guess, try and dismantle some of those structures as much as possible with friends and colleagues who can help me do that. So I guess in terms of challenges, it's personal challenges in terms of not doubting myself and what I'm able to do, not being distracted by the noise and the clutter that's out there, and just being focused on what the end goal is. I would say that, whoever you are, whatever you do in the industry or in life in general, just be clear on what your purpose is, what you're about, what your values are. And as long as you stay true to those, the challenges that you face will be easier to face with that clarity of thoughts, that clarity of vision. And so for me, challenges aren't challenges, they're just an opportunity for me to work through and come out the other side even better.
Thanks so much to Rimla for taking the time to talk to me. It took a few months for us to find a time to record this podcast. She's clearly incredibly busy with her various roles, but I'm really pleased I persisted, as she has so much wisdom and insight to share. If you're enjoying the Game Changers, it would be great if you could take a moment to review and rate the podcast. These ratings really do make a big difference to how the podcast is ranked and how likely other people are to find them. Thanks once again to Barclays for supporting this series of The Game Changers. And thanks also to Sam Walker, our rather brilliant executive producer. You can find out more about all the guests from this and the previous series at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Next week, I'll be talking to Dame Heather Rabatz, former chair of Millwall and the first woman to sit on the FA board. Heather now heads the women's sports group. So, as well as discussing her career and advice for leadership, we explore the future of commercial income for women's sport from rights deals and sponsorships.
I mean, it always strikes me when you look at the bench that you see an array of white men. You hardly ever see, certainly, any other women or black people participating. And that's echoed across virtually all of the clubs, despite the fact on the field of play we have this amazing diversity.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.